As I'm talking about films today, I thought I'd try a new background and sit in front of my DVD collection, which I am rapidly running out of shelf space for. Today I thought I'd go through a few films that I have watched recently that I would very highly recommend. Starting off with Limbo. This is a film I saw for the Lottery West Films Festival as part of the Perth Festival. This is about a group of refugees on an island in a very remote part of northern Scotland who are waiting for a response to their application for refugee status in the UK. This group of people are effectively in limbo. They can't go back to where they've come from and they can't do anything in the UK until they get that application. What really stands out with this film is the style in which it's done. It's done in a really quirky, almost Wes Anderson-esque style, and at first I thought that was going to annoy me, but actually the style is a really interesting way of you introducing to the story, which ends up being an incredibly dramatic, heartfelt and heart-wrenching story about what it is like to be a refugee in this situation. All the actors are so incredible, but the main actor, Amir El Masri, just amazing in what he does with this character. He is a man from Syria who we find out did not particularly want to leave his country. He loved his life in Syria before everything that he knew and loved about the place was destroyed by war. He's not particularly thrilled to find himself in this miserable, cold part of the UK, but he just feels it is the best option for him and his family. Stories about refugees are often filmed in a very gritty, realistic, sad way, and obviously those are completely understandable ways of telling this story. But what's lovely about what the director has done with this film is made it a beautiful story as well. And while obviously the situation shouldn't exist in the first place, it sort of highlights how it doesn't matter what story you're telling, people deserve to see their story told in an artistic and beautiful way. I think it's also way more effective at getting the point across and just hits you so emotionally because you become so attached to these characters. Next, in a completely different direction, is Scream, the latest Scream that came out. Technically Scream 5, but they just called it Scream for some reason, though they do make a joke about that in the film. I only saw the first Scream a couple of years ago because the horror genre is not my favorite, so around Halloween time I generally try and watch a well-known horror film just to sort of catch up on that genre because I have not seen a lot. I thought the first Scream was okay when I watched it, but then knowing that this new film was coming out, I watched the other 3 films in the series last year and early this year, and I think sort of binge watching them in that way kind of made it actually more of a fun experience because the films actually do have a bit of a through line and the characters do grow and change over time, which is quite interesting to watch in a series of films which very clearly weren't written as a series right from the beginning. So this latest film does bring back the old characters, but definitely focuses very heavily on a new series of characters, obviously because it's hoping to make some of these characters a bit more permanent so they can continue the series long after the original actors are tired of it probably. I thought it was so much fun. It was actually one of my favorites that I watched in the series, possibly because I got all the in-jokes and the references having just watched some of the original series recently, but I thought the meta-ness that is a key part of this franchise was really well done in this case. I thought it was a bit more clearly thought out than some of the other films and very pertinent to a lot of the film culture and fandom that is around these days. Next, I want to recommend an older film called Dick. This is a 1999 film starring Michelle Williams and Kirsten Dunst. They are just at the height of their blonde teenage era in this film. They play 2 teenagers in the 70s, and one of them happens to live in the same building where the Watergate scandal happened. I did not know really what Watergate was. It's obviously a word that I've heard a lot. American history was not something we particularly learnt in Australia, so I actually learnt quite a lot about the Watergate scandal, but basically the film posits the idea that these 2 teenage girls were actually responsible for bringing to light this scandal. It's done in such a funny way. It's really taking the stereotype of ditzy blonde teenage girls and celebrating the fact that their innocent desire to make the world a happier place actually ends up breaking one of the biggest political scandals in American history. And as I said, the 2 leads are so perfect. Kirsten Dunst, especially in that sort of 90s era, used her girl next door appearance to full advantage in so many roles such as Drop Dead Gorgeous, and this is definitely kind of along the same vein. Next, I want to recommend The Eyes of Tammy Faye. This is a film that I've heard a lot of critics saying was not good, but then also saying that Jessica Chastain's performance was very good, as obviously she won the Oscar the other day for Best Actress for this film. I actually thought it was super interesting and a really fun film. It is about the TV evangelists Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker. It kind of goes through their whole life from when they met right up until Jim Bakker got arrested and charged for fraud. Again, not knowing a lot about American history, I had never heard of these people before, so I found this so interesting, so educational, so fascinating that these two people could have such a TV presence or just such charisma coming across on TV that they could persuade so many people to donate money to them. Of course, they said that the money was going towards their church, but Jim Bakker was obviously taking a lot of that money and using it to build himself very fancy houses and all other kinds of crazy schemes. A lot of the film's criticism is that it is not critical enough of the two, especially of Tammy Faye, which is clearly something that Jessica Chastain was actually going out to do in the film. In interviews, she said that she believed that Tammy Faye was really unfairly harassed by the press. And it is interesting in that there's a scene where Tammy Faye is talking to a gay person with AIDS and telling her audience that as part of her religion, she believes that you should love everyone and not be excluding anyone. And that was obviously such a radical thing to do back then. I guess a lot of critics would say that doesn't excuse the fact that she probably knew what her husband was doing. The film was a little bit sketchy on that, I have to say. It doesn't outright say that she didn't know what was happening, but it kind of implies that she turned a blind eye, basically, because she so believed that this was her path that she was supposed to take, that she was supposed to sing songs and be on TV and spread love and that kind of thing. I guess for me, watching it, because I didn't know the original story while I was watching it, I was just really fascinated, and Jessica Chastain does such an incredible performance. You can tell she's wearing prosthetics, and yet it doesn't make her feel any less of a real person. It's so fascinating to watch. And Andrew Garfield playing her husband, equally amazing, of course, as Andrew Garfield always is. And it's also just really fun to watch. It's very vibrant, bright, over-the-top kind of film. Next, I want to recommend I Want You Back. This is a rom-com that was released on Amazon Prime on Valentine's Day. It stars Chris Day and Jenny Slate, and they play two people who have just been broken up with. They coincidentally meet each other and console each other over their respective breakups, and then become friends and hatch a plan where they will try to befriend the other one's ex and get them to break up with the person that they're currently seeing. It's not the greatest premise, and at first you kind of just have to go along with it, and the film is certainly carried along by the charm and the sort of very quirky, energetic energy that both Charlie Day and Jenny Slate have. But what I did enjoy was that the film eventually does address how bizarre the situation is, and the people surrounding the two leads react entirely how normal people would react to something like that, which was really refreshing to watch. And it just ends up being a really sweet film because of the chemistry the two leads have, which in the end is what makes or breaks a rom-com. It also has a scene where Jenny Slate sings the entire Suddenly Seymour song from the musical Little Shop of Horrors, which is my favorite song from any musical, if not my favorite song of all time. But yeah, if you are in the mood for a sweet and fun rom-com, this definitely hits the spot. Next on my list is Come On, Come On. This is Mike Mills' latest film. He is a filmmaker who only releases films like every 6 years or so, but each one is such a banger that it is always worth the wait. His film 20th Century Women is one of my favorites of all time, so I was highly anticipating this film, and thankfully it did not disappoint. This is about Joaquin Phoenix. He plays a radio presenter who is sort of traveling around the country interviewing children about what they think their futures might be like. He sort of reconnects with his sister, who's played by Gabby Hoffman, and she mentions that she needs to go look after her husband, or it could be ex-husband, they don't really explicitly say, but they're not living together anymore. But he is mentally unwell, so she has to go and look after him, and she needs someone to take care of her son. Joaquin Phoenix, in a fit of sort of familial recognition reconciliation, volunteers to come and stay in their house and look after his nephew. And then the film just becomes this amazingly sweet and beautiful exploration of the relationship that adults and children can have together. The little kid is of course amazingly precocious and intelligent and comes out with lots of witty things, and Joaquin Phoenix learns that it is a lot harder to look after a child than he initially thought. There is no huge major plot points or dramatic events at all. It is so simple and slow and sweet, and like all of Mike Mill's films, you're just going along with it and then suddenly you're crying and you don't quite know why, but he just manages to tap into this level of humanity. Next is The Batman, and yes, I am just as surprised as anyone that I actually enjoyed a Batman film. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a superhero fan particularly. I find a lot of those films very boring. I didn't even finish the Christopher Nolan trilogy because I got bored halfway through the Heath Ledger film, and I have seen the Tim Burton films, which I thought would be ones I might enjoy because they seemed a bit more like fun and over the top, but even those were just too long. So a 3-hour Batman film was not something I was necessarily looking forward to. So while watching the film, I sort of kept checking in with myself to be like, are you actually enjoying this? And I was always like, yes, I am enjoying this. It's genuinely a really fun film. I mean, not fun in the traditional sense because it's extremely dark, there's a lot of rain, it's really gritty, but it really is a proper detective sort of noir type film. It really harks back to old 40s noir, Humphrey Bogart style films, except you have the main character dressed as a giant bat. Jeffrey Wright as his counterpart police detective was so good as well. Him and Robert Pattinson have a great chemistry together, and Paul Dano as the villain is just exceptional, as Paul Dano always is. He's truly terrifying but also hilarious at the same time. However, I will say I felt the last hour was kind of unnecessary, and the sort of set piece at the end that it was kind of building up to felt weirdly a little bit anticlimactic. I think basically because at that point the mystery aspect of it had completed and it kind of became more of an action film, and so at that point I just got a little bit bored because the interest for me was very much the detective mystery side of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed Robert Pattinson as the character, and I believe they're planning on making a trilogy, so I am excited to see what they do with the next 2 films. The last film on my list is Ninjababy. This is a Norwegian film about a young woman. She's a bit of a slacker. She enjoys drawing, but she doesn't really have any job or sort of purpose in life, and right at the beginning of the film she discovers that she is pregnant. And not just that, she's already way past the point at which she's able to have an abortion. There are so many films about these kind of slacker characters that have to learn how to grow up and be adults over the course of the film, but I felt like this was a particularly good one of the genre and did that transformation really well. The main character getting pregnant, it really is a catalyst for her to look at her life as a whole, her relationships with other people, and her relationship with her drawing and her art, and whether she really wants to make a career out of it. She also talks to this baby via a cartoon baby that she calls a Ninjababy. Ninja because it sort of snuck its way in and started growing before she even realized it was there. And that could come across as gimmicky, but it actually works so well. It really adds to the whole humor of the film and also gets really poignant at points as well. What I loved about this film is that it is a film about a woman who does not want to be a mother, and she is really consistent about that throughout the whole film. I know the film Lost Daughter came out recently, and that is also a film about a woman who doesn't want to be a mother, but I actually felt like this film explored that concept much more effectively than that one did. It's just one of those really good little indie dramas that goes under the radar, but it's absolutely well worth a watch. Lastly, I just want to quickly recommend a TV show as well. This Is Going to Hurt is a British TV show starring Ben Whishaw as a doctor in an NHS hospital. It's also directed by Lucy Forbes, who did a couple of my favorite TV shows, In My Skin and The End of the Fucking World. She is just so talented at these very quirkily styled TV shows that have a lot of emotional impact as well. This TV show is absolutely devastating in the way it shows the true reality of what doctors have to go through working in under-resourced conditions and working ridiculous long hours. And yet the show is also very funny. It's based on a memoir by Adam Kay, and I believe that book is written in a very humorous style as well, so that is really brought out. And Ben Whishaw does a lot of talking to camera and asides and little witty remarks that he does so well. But it's also devastating knowing that this is based on a true story and that pretty much everything you're seeing probably happened to someone in real life. He also works on the gynecology ward, and the main part of his job is helping people give birth, and so you do see a lot of cesareans, which is just disgusting. I mean, I knew what a cesarean entailed, but when you actually see them, obviously it's not real, but like when you see them cutting through people's skin and their like muscles and then their uterus, it's so full on. But yeah, would highly recommend this show. It is just so needed, and yet it's crazy how much it's needed, because you'd think the concept of well-funded healthcare would be a no-brainer for any side of politics, and yet apparently it's not a thing that is considered necessary under some governments. So that is all the films I have to recommend. If you have watched anything recently that you think is really good, let me know in the comments. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!